Hello, this is Brian. Today is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. I'm here at the Big Laguna Trailhead here in Cleveland National Forest, Laguna Mountains, San Diego County. Today I want to do a spotlight on plants. On a plant I point out a lot towards anywhere from late August through October. It's a plant I point out a lot when it's in bloom. It's the best time to spotlight it, so why not spotlight it now? We got California Goldenrod. This plant here, beautiful Solidago velutina subspecies californica, used to be known as just Solidago californica. So Solidago velutina californica, it is a perennial herb or perennial herbaceous plant in the Sunflower Family, the Asteraceae, and it's known for its late summer and fall blooms. This is a plant that can be locally common to locally abundant here in Southern California. So, we're going to start talking about some of the lesser obvious traits before we move on to the absolute obvious traits. So, we're going to start with the plant itself. The structure of the plant is usually a root colony forming plant. And what I mean by that is there's usually quite a large root system in the soil, and then individual stalks or stems will sprout up from the roots and go above the ground. And they are known for these narrowly ovate leaves with a little bit of a fuzziness under them, and the light green stem is also covered in very fine pubescence or fuzziness, and that's where the epithet velutina comes from the velvety texture. So there's a slight velvety texture on the leaves, and the leaves are kind of a lightish, almost minty green color. Pretty typical in a lot of our plants here in California, especially here in Southern California. Probably as a way of reducing water loss through transpiration, which literally means like the leaves breathing out water vapor. But you can see they're narrow. They have some very small teeth along the edge of the leaves. Very, you have to kind of look closely to really notice them, but they are tooth-edged. And they are almost sessile, or they're basically sessile. And what sessile means is you're not going to have a really noticeable leaf stalk at the base of the leaf. The leaf blade is basically going to join up with the stem, as you can kind of see here. So the leaves are generally sessile, especially in the lower leaves. And like in a lot of Sunflower Family plants, the lower leaves are larger than the upper leaves. So these lower leaves are quite a bit larger than these upper leaves here towards the top of the stalks. And the ones near the base of the inflorescence are tiny, actually. So it's a perennial plant, although it'll often die back to the root system during the winter, or during the late fall and winter months. But again, the root system persists and will sprout up new stalks in the spring when it warms up enough. And that's quite a characteristic of a lot of perennial herbs, is that they die back to their roots. In other words, they're dormant in the winter time. They're deciduous in a way. Kind of like oak trees when they shed their leaves in the fall. They go dormant during the winter, but they don't have woody tissue to persist. They die back to their larger root systems in the ground that are protected from the coldness of the air. So, talked about the leaves. Now we have to talk about the obvious. We have to talk about the obvious. And the obvious, obviously, meaning the flowers of these plants. Now, we talked about this being a Sunflower Family plant. So, these inflorescences hold flower heads, or composites. that are mixed of different types of florets or miniature flowers. If you really look carefully, let me brush that bug off my arm there. If you look very carefully, you'll see little tiny petal-like structures on these flower heads. Those are the ray florets of the plant. And then they have some disc florets inside of them. So again, this is a composite flower head like the Asteraceae or Sunflower Family is known for. In fact, the Sunflower Family used to be named the Compositae way before they renamed it to Asteraceae. So it used to be known as Compositae because of the composite flower heads. So, of course, this is where the name Goldenrod comes from. These rod-like panicles, and that's the structure of this inflorescence called a panicle, narrowly wand-like or sometimes almost conical shape structure that holds the flowers or flower heads. So goldenrods are quite well known here in the northern coast. You'll see different species throughout pretty much a nice chunk of this whole continent, if not most of it, or not, maybe even just about all of it. Ours here is no exception. It can be locally common and locally even abundant. And what it tends to like, grassy areas, a lot of times on the edge of woodlands and meadows. So if you have meadows here in Southern California, chances are you're going to find an area, if it's not overgrown by invasive grasses, non-native weeds, if it's relatively fully composed of native plants, or at least mostly composed of native plants, you have a good chance of finding this plant, especially in the foothills and the mountains. So it is one of the nicest end of summer change of season displays you can get. They're just such bright, energetic, beautiful blossoms, and they just look so aesthetically pleasing. Those big, those tall, big, well, not really, not that tall, but some species of goldenrods can get quite tall. I've seen them tall in New Jersey. I've seen Solidago canadensis when I lived in New Jersey, and a couple other species of Solidagos, and some of them get a lot taller. But looking at a meadow of goldenrod is just one of the most aesthetically pleasing things I can think of. Just love seeing them out here in these meadows. So yeah, they like the edges of woodland, edges of forest, sometimes a little bit in the understory of open forest, open woodland, and then out in meadows. So to me, even when I was living back east, well, especially when I was living back east, it was a sign of seasonal change. You'd start getting some maybe in late July or August, but then in September they would explode, and then a lot of times they'd be blooming well into October. And I always like that, especially when you have an understory in a woodland of trees changing color. Right now it's a little early, it's still September, so we're a little early on the black oaks here at Quercus calagii, but I think it's some of the most satisfying things to see trees changing color, getting ready to go leafless. They're changing colors, and yet we still got these plants blooming like crazy right in the middle of the leaf change. And that's what I used to see a lot back east. I'd see the oaks, the maples, hickories, and everything changing color. I'd look up to the trees with their reds, yellows, and oranges, and I'd look down and see these goldenrod plants still producing heavy blooms of yellow. And that could be the same thing here with Solidago velutina subspecies californica. I have seen them blooming into late October at lower elevations. Up here they'll probably start blooming a little bit, they'll stop blooming a little bit earlier, but I would imagine they're probably still blooming into the first week or two of October at least. I would think so. But after they bloom, let's talk about the next step. Turn into these fuzzy seed heads. these little bristly top seeds called achenes, A-C-H-E-N-E, achenes, that'll blow off into the wind and help establish new plants and expand them out in the range. So some of these flowers are starting to senesce, in other words, dry off. So pretty soon we're going to start getting seed heads developing on these, and they'll be kind of gray and bristly colored. So Solidago, velutina, californica, generally from August to October, starting a little bit earlier in the high mountains and a little bit later in the lower elevations. It's a very pleasing plant, a plant I totally enjoy seeing whenever I come out hiking, especially around this time of year into fall. The beautiful California goldenrod. In fact, we're talking about the seed heads. Here they are. These are the seed heads of the goldenrod. These little tiny fuzzy things here, called achenes. And that is what blows off in the wind. So if I do this, you'll see them probably blowing off a little bit. Some of these seeds are already ripe. So there you have it. Solidago velutina subspecies californica. The California goldenrod, here from beautiful Mount Laguna recreation area here in awesome San Diego County. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you found it helpful in pointing out yet another awesome piece of our floral puzzle. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next spotlight.